JD Vance had everything figured out. The book, the Senate seat, the rising star narrative that made him one of the most talked about politicians in America. And then Donald Trump called. And everything changed. Not in the way that Vance's supporters hoped. Not in the way that the political world expected. But in a way that, looking back now, was almost inevitable from the moment Vance said yes. Because here's what nobody is saying out loud but everyone is starting to think. Donald Trump may have completely ruined JD Vance's life. That's a strong statement, and it deserves to be unpacked carefully. Because the damage isn't visible in one single moment. It accumulated slowly, quietly, through a series of decisions and dynamics and public moments that have slowly but steadily changed what JD Vance's future looks like. And the picture that's emerging is not the one anyone expected 2 years ago. Let's go back to who JD Vance was before Trump. He was, by almost any measure, one of the most interesting political figures of his generation. His book had made him famous. His background made him relatable to millions of Americans who felt unseen by both parties. His intellectual seriousness set him apart from the typical political performer. He had something rare in modern politics: authenticity. People believed his story because it was real, because he had lived it, because the pain and the struggle and the survival in those pages were not manufactured for political consumption. They were the actual texture of a real life. That authenticity was his most valuable political asset, and it was fragile in ways that he may not have fully understood when Trump came calling. Because authenticity is a one-time resource. Once you spend it, you can't get it back. And the process of becoming Donald Trump's vice president required spending it in ways that were very difficult to recover from. The positions Vance had held before Trump, the statements he had made, the criticisms of Trump himself that are now part of the public record. All of it had to be walked back, explained away, reframed. And every time he did that, a little bit of the thing that made him special disappeared. The people who had believed in the authenticity of his story started asking a question. If he could change his mind that completely about Trump, what else would he change his mind about when the political incentives pointed in a different direction? That question, once asked, doesn't go away. Now let's talk about the vice presidency itself. Because the vice presidency has been, for Vance, something close to a trap. He is visible enough to absorb enormous amounts of scrutiny and criticism, but not powerful enough to actually drive the decisions that generate that scrutiny and criticism. He defends positions he didn't choose. He justifies policies he may not fully believe in. He stands at podiums and takes questions about things he has no control over. And every time he does that, the gap between the JD Vance who wrote a book about authenticity and the JD Vance who is performing the role of loyal vice president gets a little wider. That gap is visible. People can see it. And it's costing him. Let's talk about the political future that Vance was supposed to have. Before Trump, the trajectory was clear. Build the Senate record. Establish the policy credentials. Position for a presidential run at the right moment. The kind of patient, strategic career arc that produces presidents. That arc required independence. It required the ability to build a political identity that was recognizably his own, distinct from anyone else's. The vice presidency made that impossible. Because the vice president is, by definition, not independent. The vice president is an extension of the president. Every statement, every appearance, every policy position is filtered through the lens of the administration they serve. Which means that for the past several years, JD Vance has not been building his own political identity. He has been building Donald Trump's. And when Trump's era ends, Vance will have to disentangle himself from it in ways that will be extraordinarily difficult. Because the voters who love Trump will want the next candidate to be Trump. Not Vance trying to be Trump. Trump. And the voters who don't love Trump will look at Vance and see someone who spent years defending and enabling a presidency that they opposed. That's a very narrow lane to run through. And it's a lane that didn't exist before Trump called. Let's talk about the personal dimension. Because beyond the political calculus, there is a human being at the center of this story. JD Vance grew up in circumstances that most politicians never experience. The instability, the poverty, the addiction in his family, the grinding uncertainty of a childhood that could have gone very differently. He processed all of that publicly. In a book that millions of people read, he made himself vulnerable in ways that politicians almost never do. And then he entered a political partnership with a man whose entire operating style is the opposite of vulnerability, whose currency is dominance and certainty and the projection of absolute strength. The dissonance between those two worlds, the authentic vulnerability of the book and the performance required by the Trump political universe, has been visible for anyone paying attention. And it has taken a toll, not just on his political positioning, on the image of who he is. The JD Vance who exists in the public mind today is a more complicated, more compromised, more difficult to read figure than the one who published that book. Some of that complexity is natural. People change, politicians adapt. But some of it is the specific result of what it costs to be Donald Trump's vice president. Now here's the uncomfortable truth that sits beneath all of this. Vance knew. Maybe not the full extent of it. Maybe not every specific cost. But he knew that saying yes to Trump would require compromises. That it would require walking back statements. That it would require defending positions he hadn't held before. He made the calculation that the opportunity was worth those costs. And maybe, for a different kind of politician, in a different kind of political moment, it would have been. But for someone whose entire political value was built on authenticity, the costs were always going to be higher than they would be for someone else. Because authenticity, once compromised, is almost impossible to restore. And the question that hangs over JD Vance's political future now is whether there is enough of the original thing left to build something new on. Or whether Trump's call, that decision to say yes, has permanently altered the trajectory of a career that once seemed to be pointing somewhere extraordinary. The answer to that question is still being written. But the early chapters don't look the way anyone expected. And the man who wrote a book about surviving impossible circumstances is now navigating a political situation that may be the hardest thing he has ever had to survive. Not because of poverty, not because of instability, because of the choices he made when he had every option available to him, and chose Trump. Let's end with a question that nobody in Washington is asking loudly enough. Does JD Vance regret it? Not publicly. Publicly he is loyal. Publicly he is supportive. Publicly he is everything that the role requires him to be. But privately? In the quiet moments between the events and the speeches and the defending of positions he didn't choose? The people who know him well are not answering that question directly. But they're not dismissing it either. And that silence, from people who would normally rush to defend him, says something that no public statement can. The book that made JD Vance famous was about surviving a life that tried to break him. The question now is whether the political life he chose, the one that Trump made possible, is the thing that finally does. Not through poverty, not through instability, through success. The most dangerous kind of trap. The one you walk into willingly, with your eyes open, believing it was the right call.